Good afternoon, and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Friday program. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis. Today, we are thrilled to host a Praxis favorite who's been on the program other times, Norman Solomon. Norman is a journalist, a media critic, an author, and national director of the highly effective RootsAction.org. This is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to economic fairness, equal rights for all, civil liberties, environmental protection, and defunding these endless wars that we seem to be always in the midst of. He is a lifelong advocate or associate of the Media Watch Group Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and in 1997 he founded the Institute for Public Accuracy, which provides outside mainstream news sources for journalists. And he serves as its executive director. He is the author of a dozen books, including Made Love Got War and War Made Easy: How Presidents and Pundits Keep Spinning Us to Death, which was made into a movie narrated by Sean Penn. So welcome, Norman. It's great to have you with us today.
Well, it's great to be had here. I really am glad to rejoin the gang.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like old times. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about today, because I think we've all seen this in the news and are really horrified by it, are the video clippings we're seeing of ICE, the detentions, the violence that they're raining on just ordinary citizens. It's really frightening, and it feels so much like early 1930s Germany. And I'd like to get your commentary on what's happening and where you think this is going.
There have been a lot of assumptions, I think, tacit in our lifetimes that there's this thing called foreign policy and then there's domestic policy, and as though they're two separate items. But really, I think we're seeing that, as the saying goes, wars come home, and that foreign policy in so many ways is reflected and implemented not mechanically, not in a sort of reductionist way, but in very tangible respects what the United States does elsewhere in the world is connected to what happens internally. And there are some areas of dynamics that we might think are more obvious, like Martin Luther King Jr. in 1967 described just out of control military spending as, and I'm using his words, demonic, destructive suction tube. Okay, well, that was back in the 1960s. It's true right now. I mean, up to $1 trillion in military spending a year just through the Pentagon. So, healthcare, education, housing, whether you live in California or anywhere else in this country, we're in a state where these kinds of situations, these kind of deprivations are taking place. As you're referring to, I think, Georgia, the reliance on violence, the deference to people in great authority, and it's hard to find an institution more authoritarian than the military. It is attuned to violence. It puts forward violence as the solution. And there's so many ways that's reflected. We find a lot of prison guards who are engaging in brutality, 2 million people behind bars. They came out of the military. A lot of police in the US around the country came out of the military. The Pentagon has something called a 1033 program where US military equipment and weaponry and tanks are given to police forces around the country. So I guess what I'm getting to is that shocking as it is and dangerous as it is in terms of the trend towards a fascistic politics, well, we're in a fascistic politics, towards fascistic governance, as shocking and terrible as what ICE is doing, it's in a context, and that context is one that we need to push back against and fight against because the pathway is towards a repressive state, a fascistic country.
Mhm. That brings me to an article you wrote for The Nation magazine in March that was called Democrats May Denounce Trump, but Their Militarism Paved the Way. And I want you to talk about this, how the Democrats have been complicit with the military state and with the wars that we have engaged in both, well, really all over the world. But ever since World War II, we seem to have been in one war after another. And as you're mentioning, it's coming home now, but it's, I think, very critical for us to see the context in which it arose. And that is the Democrats have been very complicit. And I'd like you to talk about that.
In this context now, of course, people are understandably frightened, upset, and appropriately deeply concerned about what the Republican Party is. It's a MAGA party, it's a Trump party. There seem to be no real boundaries. It is fascistic. That's not hyperbole. And so, at one level, we might say, well, hey, Democrats, at least, they're not fascistic, so give them a pass. And I think that's both true and not true at the same time. We have this challenge to, on the one hand, unite with some Democrats, some leaders who are militaristic and who are corporatists. And at the same time, we need to fight against militarism and fight against corporatism. So it's sort of a dialectic that we need to engage in. And history really matters because there are no boundaries around history. It's not like this year or last year just sort of, jumped out of Zeus's head or something. These eras that we're in now, last year, this moment, is a accumulation or part of a set of cascading effects that have come out of the past. So if we look at the politics of the Democratic and Republican parties, someone would have to be really stuck in a kind of a Jill Stein Green Party mentality to claim that there's not a significant difference. I mean, we have heard this time after time from people who have said, oh, look, there's no difference between the Democratic and Republican parties. Well, that was always questionable, but now it's preposterous. If you look at the domestic policies of the recent years of the Republican and Democratic parties, and you see not that we are happy, not that I am happy with Democratic Party domestic politics. It is corporatist. It is to be challenged in so many ways, but there's a tremendous difference. What about beyond the water's edge? It is difficult to find a fundamental difference between the Democratic and Republican parties. When the first Trump administration was in power, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, the leaders in the Senate and House, bragged publicly that they had fully supported the Pentagon increases. We've had wars going on in the last 30 years that Clinton and Obama and Biden have supported very strongly. We had President Clinton giving a heartfelt speech about how violence is no way to solve our problems. We have to teach our children that. At the time of the Columbine High School tragedy, at the same time, he was ordering huge airstrikes in Serbia. We had that kind of blatant militaristic hypocrisy coming from both parties, and it was tracked with the budgets that went on. When President Obama came in, he said he was against, quote, dumb wars. He was somehow telling us that there were a lot of smart wars to engage in. And we might forget that when he came in, there were about 30,000 US troops in Afghanistan. And within a couple of years, there were 100,000 US troops in Afghanistan, thanks to the orders of the commander-in-chief, Obama. And while President Biden did in 2021 finally withdraw all US troops from Afghanistan, in September of 2021, he gave a speech at the United Nations. He said, for the first time in 20 years, the United States is no longer at war. We've turned the page, which sounded nice, except it was not true at all. The Cost of War project at Brown University documented that very month the U.S. was involved in some kind of military action and activity in 85 different countries. So the so-called war on terror has never ended. It is a war of terror for so many people. The Brown University Cost of War project has documented 900,000 deaths from this US-led war directly, 4.5 million if you include indirect deaths from this US-led war. And so I guess I'd sort of summarize that if you just look in the last few years, The United States has, in combination sometimes with Israel, attacked, last time I counted, 5 different countries in the Middle East with airstrikes. So the militarism at so many layers, as yes, whatever dangers are coming from the Republican Party, a lot of it has been fueled by moving the Overton window in the wrong direction and insisting that a warfare state is what we need.
Mhm. Yeah, this is something I think a lot of us have noted that the Democratic and Republican parties are very different on domestic issues, but very similar on foreign
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah.
And that's
And
the true.
something I just add that, oh, they say, well, okay, the Russians are not as targeted by the Republican Party. Well, the Republicans more want to concentrate on militarism towards China. So sometimes there's tactical strategic differences, but they're all pushing for huge outlays, 1.7 trillion plus so-called modernization of nuclear weapons, for instance.
Right. That's the scary part is that there's still more and more money going toward weapons every single year. I want to get now to the Israel-Gaza horror that's happening, because the Democratic Party's allegiance and the senators and congresspeople, for the most part, are in the pocket of AIPAC and their corporate overlords. And so I think because AIPAC wields so much power over Congress and the Senate and both parties, the Democratic Party has not ever tried to put a stop on this. And this is really shocking when we've seen what is happening in Gaza. And a lot of this, of course, the settlements have been going on for decades. But I want to get your opinion. I mentioned to you something before we started talking today on the program, and that was Chris Hedges had been invited to speak about Israel and Gaza in Australia. And they just rescinded that invitation. And quote, this is what the reason they gave, quote, that in the interest of balancing out our program, we will withdraw our offer, unquote. Of course, the balance is all one-sided. They did have a balance with him. They just got rid of it. So this is what's happening. It's like you can't speak out. People have been targeted for being for supporting Palestinians. So I'd like to get your take on this.
We're now facing the kind of repression, the chilling or freezing of free speech that has not really existed in this country since the McCarthy era. And in some ways, it might be depicted as better. In some ways, it might be depicted as worse. I would give an example of close to home, UC Berkeley,
Mm.
when last month 160 students, faculty, and staff members were informed that the University of California, the president's office of the university, provided their names and unvetted information to the Trump administration for, and then there's a very weaselly phrase, alleged possible anti-Semitic activities, which is like a complete McCarthyite, red channel, red list, sort of a slanderous process where there's no due process, as Judith Butler, the professor there, has pointed out. There's no definition of what even the heck we're talking about. And, I noticed the other day that Rashid Khalidi, who will not now teach at Columbia University because even though he's the Edward Said Emeritus Professor there, he says it's impossible to teach Middle East studies because any honest rendition of the history of the Middle East would mean that you'd be accused, according to the definition accepted by Columbia University, of anti-Semitism. And one of the notable things to me was in his first lecture, he's gone to the People's Forum, which is streaming his lectures weekly instead of him being at Columbia. He quoted the theoretician, the great leader, and conceptual writer about Zionism, Jabotinsky. And he said, our plan is for settler colonialism. Jews, Zionists need to go into the Middle East, and we need to crush the people who live there. They don't count. We need to have a colonial relationship with them because that is our goal. We're settlers. We go in and we push them out. And if we need to crush them, literally crush their lives, we need to do it. Well, if there was a quote from what he said, this theoretician, or for that matter, from Ben Gurion or others, if you were to go to the UC campus and quote these visionaries of Zionism and just say, well, Zionism is settler colonialism, you very well might be accused of anti-Semitism. So leading Zionists, in their own words, if they were quoted,
Mhm.
if we just pay attention to history and bring it up, that's how bad the climate has gotten. So one of the unique characteristics, and I'll stop here because I don't want to go on all day about it, is that this form of repression has merged support for Israel with support for US militarism,
Mhm.
with support for quashing free speech. And this is something I was going to say new, but it's certainly become more and more present. So the net effect is that we have a US military and the Israeli military that function together in the Middle East, to put it mildly. Israel could never be doing what it's been doing in Gaza without 70% of its imports of weapons coming from the United States. But politically in the United States, we have a lot of the Democratic Party and all the Republican Party functioning with extreme racist Zionist interests
Mhm.
who don't say that anything matters about Palestinian lives and will not acknowledge what is clear now from reports and experts that Israel continues to engage in genocide. Don't take my word for it. Look at the extensive reports issued, all concluding that the United States is shipping arms to Israel and that Israel is engaged in genocide. No equivocation from these groups.
Mhm.
Israel is continuing to engage in genocide. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, and Physicians for Human Rights Israel, all with that conclusion. So this is a an old playbook with new elements, I think. You know, telling people that they should not use the First Amendment in the wrong way. That's old. That was 1919. Didn't Eugene Debs go to prison because he opposed World War I? It happened during the McCarthy era. It's happening now, and a new element is it's not that you're a communist, it's that you're anti-Semitic. That's just another tool to get people to obey.
Yeah, anti-Semitism as a weapon, as we've seen, that's really what's happening right now. Um, Before we finish, I want to go to Russia, Ukraine, because this is another real thorn. And what I noticed both in the Biden administration and now too is that the word negotiation has just kind of been dropped from our lexicon in this country. We don't talk
Yeah.
about negotiations. We talk about winners and losers and who's going to prevail. Um, but at some point, that war has to end. And it's like, how many more people have to die before a settlement is negotiated? So I wanted to get your opinion on what might have to happen to get a negotiated settlement between Russia and Ukraine. How do you see that playing out? And one thing that's really bothered me a lot is people equate support for Ukraine with more people dying in Ukraine. You know what I mean? It's like more
Right.
military assistance to Ukraine is considered support. I don't consider that support. I consider that killing. And so I wanted to get your take on all this.
Well, there's a tacit and sometimes explicit assumptions that people in the United States and the US government take the really high moral ground by saying, in effect, let's you and them keep fighting. Let's you and them keep killing each other. And we're the really moral force here.
Mhm.
The United States stands for justice and so forth. And so we'll keep sending you weapons. And I just don't understand how that's really a moral position. We're very much oriented in our politics, in our media, in this kind of situation. There's all good and all bad.
Mm.
And I certainly think we should condemn the Russian invasion and occupation. I'm just against bombing cities, bombing civilians. That's for sure. And at the same time, we do have a history here, and history is supposed to matter. And so it is worth thinking about what the response from the US government would have been if the Warsaw Pact said, okay, we're going to arm Mexico, we're going to arm Canada, and we're going to be shipping them weapons and so forth. Uh, how long would it take for the United States to take military action as it did during the Cuban Missile Crisis with the blockade and threat of invasion and so forth? It doesn't justify anybody. It does say that the United States isn't the only country with the right to have what it considers to be security concerns. And although Putin has turned into a fascistic leader, I don't think he was 10 years ago, the fact is that across the political spectrum in Russia, the really lowercase d Democrats in Russia, the dissidents of various eras, including 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, all the way to the monarchists and the right wingers and so forth, they all have been clear all the way along, unacceptable for Ukraine to join NATO. It was a non-controversial position. But for the United States, as President Biden said right before the invasion, if Ukraine wanted to uh, go ahead and join NATO, well, that's just fine. Well, that's the kind of attitude that Antony Blinken expressed when he said, uh, well, we need a rules-based order. And what he really meant is we make the rules and we break the rules. So the United States invades Iraq, the United States invades Afghanistan, it helps lead the bombing of Libya. We engage in regime change. So we get to do that, but we have the high moral ground to tell Russia how bad they are.
Yeah, that's, I think knowing the history and explaining some of the history allows for context. And this is what we don't get in our media. And that's, I think it shaped a lot of people's opinions that they don't get a larger context. And how we impart that, it's difficult when we live in a soundbite culture that really doesn't want to hear. And as you mentioned just now, we have binary ways of looking at these wars. It's like you're for or against it, you're for or against. If you're against Putin, then you see it one way. If you're against Ukraine, you see it another. But seeing the overall picture is not acceptable. And I think
Yes,
that's what
I
we're
think
up
that's
against.
right. And in addition to that, another vector to look in on it is, well, let's have a single standard. If we're going to say we have a moral position, let's have a consistent moral position. And for instance, some of the defenders of Israel's actions, of which there are fewer and fewer, say, well, they want to blame Hamas. Okay, well, Hamas committed atrocities on October 7th, no doubt. So if we're against atrocities, let's take a position. The US should not arm Hamas and should not arm Israel. It's just a consistent position. If the United States says that it should not be allowing or countenance invasions that slaughter civilians, then why is it giving billions of dollars of weapons every year to Israel to do just that?
Yeah. I want to open it up to questions. I just wanted to mention something else that you might have some things to tell us that we might be able to convey to other people about the yes on Proposition 50 and what you feel about what's happening with the gerrymandering in our country.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, I heard a Republican on the radio yesterday saying, we have to stand for principle. We want people to have their representation, which certainly sounds good. So tell it to the legislature in Texas.
Mm.
I mean, we are in a battle where fascists are trying to take over the federal government. They, for now at least, have two branches and a big, big foothold from the top down of the judicial branch. So, do we want to say, okay, you guys can take it all? Because that's what the Texas move was, is to try to prevent a possibility that the House will turn over to Democrats in a year and a half. So that's where we are. So it's not the world I want, or I think that a lot of people want. But Prop 50, I mean, I think it's minimal It's minimal to be able to try to prevent the hammerlock from the right wing on the Congress to continue.
Yeah, it's important. One last thing. What is your take on the speeches given by Hegseth and Trump to the generals? It was so embarrassing to just see even clips of it. I thought, oh my God, what are they thinking while they're sitting there? These idiots telling them what they should be doing. What do you think they are thinking after this happened?
Oh, well, my impression, and I saw the figure 800 generals and admirals, sort of hard to fathom. They're going to be all over the map. I mean, I think the politics of uh, leaders of the Pentagon vary like they do in the population as a whole. We had Mark Milley, saying that, quote, Trump is a fascist to the core. And I think the last couple of years since that was reported, I think in the Bob Woodward book, we've seen that that's true. And so and this was something that not only people at Roots Action, but many, many people were warning about a year ago, is that if Trump got back in, he would learn from last time. He wouldn't surround himself from anybody that would restrain him. And I think we're seeing that now.
Well, that's what worries me. Is like what percentage of the generals would be fine with suppressing the whole citizenry of this country? It's like it's
Yeah.
unclear to me how dangerous or undangerous the military might be in our own country for all of us.
Yeah. And the chain of command. I mean, the Secretary of Defense, I'll put that in quotes, the Defense Secretary, he's really unhinged.
Yeah, definitely unhinged. So I want to open it up right now for people who might have questions. And when I call on you, you can unmute yourself. So I'm looking to see if there are people. It's easier if if you know how to use the automatic thing. And if you don't, I'm looking to see if hands are coming up physically. Um, Sometimes when you scratch your head, it looks like you have your hand up. Oh, Kimberly, did you have your hand up? Yes. Okay, go ahead, Kimberly. Unmute.
Okay, hi. Thanks, Norman. That was terrific. Basically my question is really it was a follow-up to what Georgia was just describing in terms of the military. And I keep looking and thinking about, okay, where is the force in the United States that can stop some of these Trump motions and changes? And of course, everyone points to the judiciary, and we know, well, it's a little mixed bag there, especially until it gets to the Supreme Court. And so I was wondering whether or not you think there is some component of the military that could stop some of his policies, and if not there, and if maybe not in the judiciary system, where else?
Good.
Yeah, it's a key question, and some of it's being played out. I think we're finding that at the district court level, the appeals court level, very few of those judges are siding with Trump. They're overturning one of his lawless actions after another. I haven't seen a percentage, but I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of Supreme Court rulings on this have sided with Trump,
Yes.
and which I suppose isn't surprising considering who has appointed six of those nine people. So there's that. I'm not assuming that the Supreme Court would go along with everything. I don't think they will, quite likely, but they're going to go along with most of it. The military, I mean, to me, as the saying goes, it's a bit of a black box. It's hard to tell, but in a way, it's sort of coming back to bite us. Not that we want any military control over the government, but the precept of civilian control is really supposed to be a solid thing, right? That's what we want. Well, who are the civilians in control? It's the president and the secretary of state, which is like a nightmare. So I don't know. The answer is to be seen. I think political and social pressure is going to be pivotal. So, although this has been, to put it mildly, for about a half hour, a rather downbeat conversation, still people are organizing and there is political pressure that can be brought to bear. I think as this year turns into next year, there are some Republicans in swing states who will start to see that they might lose their seats. Just a few, that's all it would take to swing the balance. I think what we've seen with the Kimmel episode in terms of him being kicked off the air and then brought back in when he was indefinitely suspended, I think the plan was probably to never let him back on. But people organized and raised hell, so that's a sort of a silver lining and maybe a glimmer of hope.
Hopefully. Do we have some more questions? I'm looking. I think Katie, you want to unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, such an honor to have you, Norman. And I
Glad to be
think I
here.
saw Linda's hand up there. Uh, uh, you know, the powerlessness around this stuff is so hard, the internal experience of it. I guess it brings up for me, what do you most recommend we follow regarding who's speaking and writing? I know Heather Wilcoxon and Robert Reich and others are out there doing good work, but which of the podcasts, YouTubes, writers do you most follow?
Yeah, no, thanks. There's a lot of good information out there. Thank goodness we do have the internet and people taking a lot of initiative. I go to Common Dreams a lot, commondreams.org. I think they, as a daily news source, they're terrific. And they recognized years ago that in terms of articles that were timely in the category of news, there was really a vacuum. And I think that Common Dreams has helped to fill that. Of course, Democracy Now! Is terrific in terms of news and commentary and analysis. I think they've been great. I really appreciate Truth Out for what they do and how they augment other perspectives. We started a website called progressivehub.net, and we have several new articles up there every day. So if you do make a habit of going to progressivehub.net, a unique feature is that we decided that every article about a problem needed to have an action literally on the same page.
Great.
So there is no news account or commentary that tells us what's wrong, or any news and commentary about tells us what could be done without something really on the same screen saying you can, in a minute at least, click here, send a message to your congresspersons or whatever. So that's another outlet. I think that when we can support these independent outlets, it's really, really important. And if there's a local radio station that you think is doing the job, then they also deserve our support and certainly our attention. One more thing I would say about the collapse of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which was a real shock to stations not only like KQED, which were multi-million dollar, but also like a small one, like out in West Marin, that on a good day has a signal all the way up to Santa Rosa, KWMR, very dependent on CPB money.
Yeah.
And the right wing has been trying to destroy any public broadcasting for decades, and they finally made major headways. But I do want to say we should consider the specific radio station. I mean, I personally wouldn't give money to KQED. I'd rather give it to Democracy Now! Or Common Dreams, because it's sort of related to what we were saying earlier. When it comes to militarism, when it comes to the bipartisan consensus issues, a program like All Things Considered, a Morning Edition, they've been part of the problem as much as any kind of solution.
I think that's well put, Norman, because a lot of people think, oh, it's so drastic that NPR is being cut, but they have been part of the status quo. They haven't been critical. And the things that you mentioned, I didn't know about progressivehub.net, but I'll definitely check it out. Common Dreams is an excellent daily news source online that there's new information every day, sometimes more than once a day.
And what about podcasts like Tom Hartman, or is there anybody you like? Because I do listen while I walk.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. Richard Eskow, Eskow, he has something called the Zero Hour. And we actually have a prominent link at the top of progressivehub.net. We work with Richard. He was the chief speechwriter for Bernie Sanders in 2016. And he's great. And he has a lot of interviews. As a matter of fact, Georgia, the guest you have coming up next, Zapata, did a great interview on that show on the Zero Hour. And he has a lot of a lot of folks. Tom Hartman, I give him credit that he has been for many years warning of the fascistic power and energy of the Trump regimes in waiting and the Republican Party. So I give him credit. His foreign policy, he has said that he thinks the United States has been a positive force in the world. He has uh, really given the Pentagon the benefit of the doubt. And in a way, it's sort of the Democratic Party split. He's on domestic policy. I have no argument. I would love to dialogue with him about his foreign policy, which seems
Yeah.
indistinguishable from the Biden administration, which reminds me, Heather Cox Richardson, she's just such a thorough
Yeah.
historian,
Yeah.
and she knows so much about the right wing and the populism.
Yeah.
She, on a daily basis, deconstructs um, these horrible machinations and lies coming from the Republican Party, including, of course, Trump. And last year and the year before, she was like a total promoter of Joe Biden. Like whatever Joe Biden did was great with her. She just thought it was all fine. When I read her, I couldn't find any real criticism of his militarism or his enabling of the genocide in Gaza.
These are really good points you're bringing out,
Yeah.
Norman, and it's discussions I've had with a lot of people where I do have problems with exactly the ones that you're talking about for the exact same reasons you're talking about. Jerry has his hand up, so I want to go to him. Jerry, you're mute if you're talking. Jerry,
I
you
think
need
he's
oh, there we
talking.
go.
Yeah.
Jerry, you're mute. We're not
Right,
hearing.
sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so recently I saw AOC on MSNBC, and she was extraordinary. And to me, she's the kind of politician that I could really be inspired by to, do everything I could to support her. So I guess my question for you, Norman, is do you see any possibility that a politician like AOC could really get some traction in the Democratic Party?
I think there's really some good momentum. Zoran Mamdani is a guiding light right now. It's tremendously exciting. If it goes the way it seems to be going, he will probably be the next mayor of New York City. And on a whole range of issues of social justice and racism and immigrant rights and foreign policy and human rights and more. He's just terrific. I mean, it's very exciting that this is possible. And it was done through grassroots organizing. And the system, it was a shock to the system, as the saying goes. And once the system realized it was too late, and so he's on a trajectory, it looks like, to win this election. I just read that today or yesterday, Cori Bush announced she's going to run to try to take her seat back.
Mhm.
And she was a target of AIPAC. Jamal Bowman was a target of AIPAC. They both defeated these I think, great leaders last year. And we have a few other inspiring people in Congress, I think. Comes to mind Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, AOC, as you mentioned. Bernie Sanders really showed that it's possible to win, but it's extremely difficult given what we're up against in terms of big money and corporate media and so forth.
Well, it's interesting that, the Fight Oligarchy tour that Bernie Sanders has done and AOC and joined him for part of it, and some of the other people who are running for office who are progressives have joined him on that tour. And it's interesting to me that the mainstream media really hasn't picked up on that tour at all that I could see. He's been getting thousands of people to show up. I mean, all the venues are full. And I can't believe that he's not getting press on this. It's shocking to me.
Yeah, it was like initially there was a bit of coverage, but then it's like old news, whereas it's really exciting, it's really energizing. It's coming again from the grassroots. I think of how going back to Seattle 1999, the WTO demonstrations, the media system, the political system was shocked. How could this happen? How could there be basically a shutdown of WTO? Many thousands of people who converged on there to challenge the model of neoliberalism and structural adjustment and really the IMF and the World Bank ravaging the possibilities of so many what then we called third world countries. And in many ways, we have this dynamic of the mass media simply are tuned out. And whether we can change history from the bottom up just is the ongoing challenge.
We know an interesting thing that, Nate Silver, who's this predicting who's going to run and who's going to win, he predicts that AOC is going to run for president in 2028.
As I say, my crystal ball is in the shop. I hope and my hunch is she
Too
will
early.
run against
Schumer.
Schumer. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Schumer's up in 2028. I think that would
Also,
be more
Schumer might be up.
advisable.
He might be up next year. I'm not sure which year he's up.
Hmm.
That might depend on what she runs at. Eventually, she's going to run for president, I'm sure.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. Certainly want to live long enough to see that.
Yes.
Um,
Me too.
and I wanted to mention because Roots Action, which you started, is such an important organizing organization. And I want you to tell us a little bit about Roots Action.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we started almost 15 years ago because we saw the need for online action groups. We were frustrated with Move On, which was very big at the time, still is pretty big. And they really opposed wars when Bush was in the White House. And then Obama came in the White House. It was like all of a sudden they weren't fighting wars anymore. And so we wanted a consistent policy, a multi-issue action arm online. And so we started with 0 people. And we have built a, not only, as I mentioned, uh, progressive hub, but just an online presence to find ways that people can get information and take action, often, not always, but usually online. And we have more than 1 million people now who have taken action, who are on our email list. It's a real challenge, though, because 14 years ago, the email space wasn't nearly as crowded as it is now. I'm sure you all
We
experienced
know.
that, just the flood coming in. So for good and ill. And so we're continuing to grow, and we have programs like we have a No War on Iran program. We've worked a lot on Gaza issues. We're starting to raise money tomorrow for Cori Bush's effort to get back into the House and many other issues. So I just invite people, if you aren't already getting our action alerts, uh, or if you are, go to our website, which is rootsaction.org, and see what's valuable there. One of the things we have is called DIY Roots Action, where you can start your own petition. And whoever signs it, then you can message later on. So it's very different than change.org. It's about giving people online access to communicate with people who have signed their petitions.
Very good. Do we have other questions? I think, coming up with some of the places where we get information is really important because if we're only getting MSNBC and the New York Times or the Washington Post, we're not getting the news. We're getting a section of the news, but there's so much left out. And I think that's what we're trying to come up with today is what are some of the best places we can go to and the best organizations. And what you're doing, Norman, today, which I think is really important, is you're distinguishing between the left that's kind of left but stays in the Democratic Party left versus a progressive left in organizations. And I think that's just super important. I mean, every issue we've talked about, you've made that distinction. And a lot of times people don't see that distinction. So I think this has been very, very helpful. I will go to you, Katie, but before I do, I want to see if there's anyone else who hasn't asked a question once.
Yes, Georgia, I do. I'd like to ask.
Okay, I'm going to go to you and then Lori. Okay, Brian?
Norman, thanks so much for being here.
Sure.
My
Pleasure.
question is, so we're spending close to $1 trillion, over like $985 billion every year on the military war machine budget. What can we do? What can be done to bring some awareness that we need to cut it in half? Because no other country is spending anywhere near what we spend here.
Yeah, the United States is spending more than the next 10 countries combined on weapons, and most of those on the military overall. And most of those other 10 countries are allies. So it's just complete, so to speak, overkill. I think it's a political struggle. I mean, it has to do with media, it has to do with community organizing, it has to do with education. Ultimately, who gets to decide? It's people in Congress. And, I'm all for protest politics, but it needs to be combined with an electoral strategy so we can change who's in there and who's making these decisions.
Okay, Lori.
Can I cede to Linda and then I'll go after Linda? She's
Sure,
been
go
trying to
ahead.
get up.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, go ahead,
Okay.
Linda. Sorry.
You know, during the UN procedures, I got really scared when there was that. I don't know who did it. We still don't. It's like the news falls out, so we don't always have follow up. But I don't know if it was a foreign country, but there was some thing that was going to completely take out all the communications in New York. It could have taken them out all over our country. That's pretty scary. I mean, we have lost so many of the safeguards that our country used to have to keep us safe. How do you feel about that? Or are you focused on that at all?
Well, broadly, in terms of safeguards, it's a political question, right? Who controls the federal government, the state governments, the military apparatus, the National Guard, right? And that's
Yeah.
ultimately it. And of course, the court system. I think one of the flaws in our assumptions, certainly when I was growing up, I went to civics class and we learned there were the three branches of government. And what was the sort of the political or civic catechism? It was Congress makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, the courts interpret the laws, which sounded really great. How many troops does the Supreme Court have? Like zero. I don't even think the legislative branch has any. And so there's been a lot of pride. Hey, we have this person called the commander in chief. That doesn't sound very reassuring. So it goes to your point about safeguards. What are the safeguards? And it can sound sort of facile, but I do think the safeguards have to do with engaged, well-informed, active people in the country. When that happens, there's possibilities. And we have so many historic examples in other countries. There was a terrorist attack in Spain many years ago, and people could have reacted by saying, oh, we're gonna move rightward. Instead, they decided we're gonna move leftward. We're gonna not resort to militaristic responses to this atrocity. And so I think none of this is foreordained. It depends on how well people can educate and agitate and organize effectively.
Yeah, in Spain, so great. Okay, so Lori, go ahead.
All right. Norman, once again, it's wonderful having you here. Came on a little bit later, work conflict, but I just want to say that I find this refreshing that you're able to always clarify your pathways. I think what's happening is that as a person trying to determine their news sources, what's happening today, it is so difficult to get that filter or the golden brick road anymore. And the thing is that I might talk to Georgia and Georgia would tell me, "Oh no, that's not what you want to be hearing." Okay? Or let's talk about the different viewpoint that she's aware of. So we still, as things are being shut down, all right, you know, I have to say, I think the focus has to be that we have to make people aware with a channel, all right, that they can list. I'm so grateful for you, mentioning all these resources because this is new. And I pass this on to my son who's 35 years old because his entire life is around Reddit and YouTube videos.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
And this is the future of our country.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
So I always believe that it's important for us to be speaking not only about our generation, but also about the youth and the pathways for youth. They are the voters when we are no longer able to do this. And and they are woefully unprepared because they have tuned out.
Yeah, I think
Well,
that's really, really important
mm-hmm.
point. A lot of them have tuned out.
Well, Lori, it's good to see and hear you again. I think about that a lot, as I think we all do sooner or later is our as we get older, and what does it mean? We used to be a young generation by definition. Now we're not. Now we see other generations coming up. At Roots Action, we have people ranging from in their 30s to their 70s. And at this point, I think of somebody in their 30s as young, even if they don't. And I really get a lot of satisfaction and encouragement from the way that I learn from them and they learn from me. And part of what it underscores is that none of this is passed along automatically in terms of history. And I think one of the very sad things about a repressive regime, as I've read about in Chile, was that there was the Popular Unity government with the CIA's help. The generals took over. For 17 years, a fascistic regime was in place, and it wiped out an entire continuity. And I think that's one of our challenges now. We don't want that to happen in this country. We don't want the positives of our society about, although we know falls far short, but everything we have to be proud of, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, women's rights, gay rights, environmental protection, and so much more. That's because people organize, but it is a legacy that's under the gun now. And as we defend it, we got to find better ways to convey to people who are now 10, 20, 30 years old what came before them, because otherwise they won't know.
Yeah.
And I would like to just add, if that's possible, I'm tracking several histories in Wikipedia, and things are changing under Wikipedia. So how are we going to be able to preserve our culture? I think an excellent piece, if I could find it, is entering into 2025. Okay, what did we have, and then what have we lost?
Yeah.
And what are the chances of percentage of return? Okay, how can we bring it back?
That's
And
right.
and because at this point it is so chaotic and it is so devastating that, to me, I have no faith that anybody's even going to step up to the plate, because the only one that hits a home run, I'm sorry, this is,
Yeah, I'm
that
gonna
time of
stop you
year.
soon.
Okay. Okay. The only one that hits a home run is the president. What he says goes, and it goes through all four bases.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just put a bunch of things in the chat box for the ones that we've been talking about, the alternate sources of information and news.
I'm reminded too, and a lot of comments that I've been hearing remind me that some of our concepts, some of my concepts early on turned out to not be true. I remember hearing and saying 40 years ago, something I'd heard, it matters more who's sitting in than who's sitting in the Oval Office, which sounds kind of catchy, and it was totally wrong. It was foreclosing a dialectic, which it's not which one or the other. It's ultimately that people need to organize because that's what changes history, and state power is crucial. Whether we call it a home run or whatever else, people in the top echelons of the government are crucial.
Okay, if you have a quick question, Katie, we'll finish with you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. So here's the question. Thank you, by the way. You've been very, very fascinating as always and very thorough. Um, with regard to safeguards, if you say we need engaged, active people, and we need people obviously who can articulate, I wonder why there could not be a coalition formed I actually sent letters myself this week to people like Chris Murphy and Ocasio and even Spritzer and some other people, and just said, why don't you guys all meet all the time and put your heads together? And what about creating a consistent moral position? How about it? There's more power in numbers instead of them all being in separate cubicles.
They
Well,
are.
we have a really big country and we have a complex set of cultures and so forth. And I think building coalitions as much as possible is good. At the same time, a healthy ecology has so much going on. We don't want to just have a lot of tall trees or whatever. We need just a lot of different culturally and politically diverse um, aspects of sustaining our lives and making life more healthy. So I think your point is good, and meanwhile, it's a challenge, and we will not have perfect unity, but we can build coalitions that can do the two things that are so crucial right now. That, as I mentioned anyway, we got to do a zillion things, but the two things, we've got to defeat the Republicans, and we need to create and move forward and implement a genuine progressive agenda. And those are not separate agendas to do those two things. I think they are both mutually reinforcing.
Great. I want to thank you, Norman. This has been really a good conversation today, and I think we've all gotten a lot from it. I've saved the chat. I'm going to suggest other people do that because there's some really good sources that we've brought up in the conversation today, and I've added some that weren't in the conversation, but I think that are really worthwhile progressive sources. So, any last few words you want to say, Norman, before we close?
Oh, well, my friend Tim Carpenter, who's no longer
Oh,
physically with us, used to say that the spreadsheets don't make it in the history books. And yet it's really that methodical organizing that gives us genuine reason for hope. So we'll keep organizing. And I do want to thank you, Georgia, and thank everybody else for making our hour happen here.
thank you again. I will be